If you think you know resource management, we've got another thing for you, because this game maybe takes the cake in terms of resource management. It is the quintessential resource management game.
Yeah, you're managing like 16 different resources in this game, which is kind of insane, but it does fit the theme. I mean, it really does. This Skara Brae was a real historical civilization that existed, and they accumulated trash, as I think a lot of civilizations did.
Midden, as they call it.
As they call it now, midden, which is like the refuse of previous civilizations. Yep. And they would effectively dump all their trash into these giant garbage dumps that over generations, it would like compost into these giant hills, which they would then carve out
and live in. Yeah.
So they're like literally living in their own trash in a way. And that's a huge part of this game, honestly.
It is a giant part of this game, dealing with all of this stuff, all these resources, but also some of that converts into midden, or that trash that you don't want to keep so much. And you can see all the resources right here. Ryan wasn't kidding. There are 16 resources. In fact, I think there's extra too, because I'm using a special tile here that includes the 3 boar, which is something only I can do.
Yeah, 15, the boar, and then food is its own kind of
That's true.
thing.
That's true.
So, yes.
But yeah, we're going to be collecting resources and managing them on our board. This isn't a game where you just keep all the resources you want off to the side.
Right.
Your board is mostly about those resources. You can see here, there's a track here where I have a few resources. We actually played just one of the 4 rounds just now to get the game going so we could show you some things. So I have a few resources here. My slider has moved up 1. So now I'm going to be creating 1 midden. The further it goes up, the more of that it's going to create at the end of each round. And I might even lose points if I don't manage it well.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the core that we should talk about, because the entire game is kind of based around this track. The more resources that you accumulate, the more you have to push this slider to make room for them, the more trash you generate every round. And no, the slider just does not go down as you spend the resources. Once you've created that much trash, it's kind of escalating, and you're creating more and more trash. Now I'm dealing with 4 trash every round, which is going to fill this up and potentially push it farther and farther. And you can get in this situation where you kind of feel like you're now just bailing yourself out, trying to get rid of all the trash you're making, not to mention all the resources that you're bringing in, because you still do have to bring resources in, not just to feed your people, but also to improve your player board and really excel at the other aspects of the game that are scored.
Yeah, and speaking of player boards, that is a big part of this game here. You can see we each have this player board, and then each player color is going to have a number of tiles, and then you're going to add 1 from this stack where you can basically get it and have slightly, well, not even slightly, quite a bit different variable player power.
Yeah, they're quite asymmetric. The basic 9 tiles that everybody has are all the same. They're going to do some various functions we'll talk about, but your 10th tile is incredibly different, and these are like specialized action tiles. Everybody's going to get a selection to choose from, and you're going to choose one, and these change your game. You're going to be doing things where other players are going to look over and be like, you did what?
I mean, yeah, for sure. Mine is to hunt boar. No one else can do this in the game. There's only those 3 boar, and it's basically a very productive resource. If I hunt boar and then cook boar, which again, I'm the only person who'll be able to cook boar, I'm actually going to get a lot of food and a little bit more resources more efficiently than I would from the normal things that you might cook to feed your settlers.
Yeah, and these tiles introduce a bunch of different mechanics, so it's kind of one of those things, again, you learn the game and then you go, oh, well, now I have a tile that breaks a rule, like these extra workers that are added to your worker supply, and only you will have access to these extra workers. Or these spindle cards, which give you a way to produce wool, which is one of the resources that is hard to normally produce, but you'll get access to a special deck of cards that only you can build.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because when we played, neither of us had either of those special tiles, so those weren't really even part of our game. But like I said, what we have out here are our player boards, all those action tiles, all the resources, and then right here in the middle, you're going to see a big row of cards. These are the cards that you're going to be adding to your player board or underneath your player board. And there's a few different cards out here. You're going to see people, which are the settlers that you're going to bring out and put under specific action tiles over here. They're going to actually power those up over time and activate them as you acquire them. But then there's a bunch of these brown ones. I've got a roof here, which I've added to my civilization here because that's going to help me not have to feed my people. You've got these balls here, and these balls are going to allow you to get more knives. Knives are a unique resource that you still have to hold on your resource board, But knives are going to be used when you use your people over here to sort of artificially enhance that power that they have to produce things. And then the last thing are these utensils.
Yeah, and these utensil cards, again, they give you the ability to produce extra food on your turn. So if you haven't gathered just by how we're kind of talking about it, the flow of the game is you are bringing people in and then having to feed them. And you're either feeding them by gathering resources that can be cooked to produce food to feed them at the end of the round, or you're sheltering them underneath these roof cards, which can be drafted from the row or earned in very specific ways to kind of protect your people, and those people you don't have to feed. If you can't feed all your people, you lose them. And like David mentioned, the more people you have in a row, the more of those resources you're going to get every time you bring a new person in, which again, that can be good or bad. It's good because it gets you a lot of resources, but it's bad because you have to quickly find ways to spend those resources or manage them, because when you bring a settler in, you get one resource for every settler of that type. So if you bring in your fourth settler here in the water, you're getting potentially 4 of these shells or seaweed, and that's a lot, especially if you're really tight and you're going to be moving your slider. So that decision of which cards to take is kind of a fundamental decision of the game.
Yeah, you're going to want to make sure that you have a use for those things, right? Because you want to bring in the resources and then use those resources. So people are going to be building sort of like engines here with the settlers that they choose. And of course, those settlers are dictated by the ones that are available out here. And this game ramps, I want to say that, quite a bit, because each round of the 4 rounds, we start with 1 worker, but then we're going to get an extra worker every time. And the general structure of the game, in fact, I'll just show you right now. We'd start with this row. Each round, you're going to draft a card from here, then here, then here, in turn order. But the turn order is really interesting. It works on this little dial here. I can sort of delay my turn, and whoever's on top goes first, by just moving 1 space and not taking something. Now, I'm giving up first pick on these things. Everyone else is likely to go ahead of me. Then, if you pick something, you're going to actually move 2. So we're playing with a dummy player. They would always take this first card. Then Ryan would go, and I guess you could delay too.
I could delay
if
too,
you want.
and
But let's
still,
say he doesn't. Let's say he goes. He's going to have first pick here. He'd take a card.
Yeah, let's talk about how these cards work a little bit, because there's 2 different types of cards and they all produce something. But these brown cards, when you take them, they just go to your player board.
Yeah.
And they sit there and they will produce something, like David said. But the actual settlers have 2 functions. Yes, they will provide resources like I mentioned, but they also have a bonus ability that can only be used the turn you play them.
Yeah.
And a lot of those abilities are going to be resource conversions. Sometimes they'll just give you more resources, but like this one just gives you a rabbit. But some, like this guy, gives you a wheat for every person you have in that row. This guy lets you turn 3 wheat in for a cow. So there's all different kinds of conversions, and you can kind of plan ahead based on what's coming.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to collect these people, but not too many people.
No, yeah, you're going to want to take a look, because if these 2-second sets here have just settlers, and you take a settler here, you're necessarily going to be taking on 3 settlers, and you better have food for them at the end of the round.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because you'll see little tiny micro engines. For example, if I took this brown guy here, I'd place them specifically here under this gather tile. And since I have another one, I'm going to get 2 of this. So I would take 2 wood, and his power is to spend 1 of those wood to get 2 wool. So if I was just placing him alone, I would get the 1 wood I needed to make his power work. Not all cards are like that, though. So you do have to do some planning to make sure that you have the resources to use that bottom bonus sometimes.
Yeah, and the resources, again, that you're trying to get are going to depend on what strategy you have. And some of this is maybe dictated by that one special tile, but the other aspect of the game is using these action tiles. After you draft one of these cards and carry out its ability fully, you're going to get to place your worker on any one of these available actions. Now, in the first round, like David said, you get 1, then 2, then 3, then 4 that you're placing. So you're able to do quite a bit on your board. And each one of these actions is going to do something different, and it's going to spend different types of resources. For example, this furnish action here, which is going to move up one of these dials up the furnish track, which, by the way, actually makes your cards down here worth points.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to balance there.
You're going to want to do that.
You're going to want to do that. But it uses cloth and wool and hide. So maybe you're in a situation where you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to get cloth and hides, and I'm going to be furnishing a whole lot because I really want to get to the top of that furnish track. Or there's a trade action that's going to move this trade token up, which is another way to score points. And maybe you're thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to collect trade goods and move that token up. So you're not necessarily going to have like a full-blown strategy where you can plan out your whole game at the beginning, but it does help to have some kind of general idea. as
Yeah.
to what you're focusing on before you start drafting.
And like I said, the game ramps, so it gives you some time. The first round feels like it's over in a second. Like literally, we'd go through these cards, we'd have 3 cards in our display, and then we just use the 1 worker, and it's like, oh, okay, this game's gonna be quick. But it does slowly creep up, and by the end, you're placing a ton of guys and getting a ton done. So if you start to worry about all of this garbage or trash that you have, in that last round, you're gonna be placing 4 workers out
4
here.
workers per card. So
Yeah.
really, you're doing 12 worker placements.
In that last round,
In that
that's a
last
lot.
round, which
So
is, yeah, it's quite a bit.
it's more than you'd think. I remember when we played, I was like, oh, wow, I'm actually able to do a lot with a lot of these
Well, yeah,
things
because
that I have.
there's the three sections to each round, and you're like, okay, well, I placed 3 workers. Okay, I get to take 3 actions. But then the second round, as soon as you get your second guy and you go, oh, I get 6 this time, and then 9, it really does ramp up, but you need it to, because as you start to get so many different people, and I should mention that when you place them and get those goods, that's mandatory. That's kind of...
Yeah, you can't say, I don't want any trash.
Right, that's kind of simulating that bringing new people into your community is increasing the amount of resources you need. It is increasing the amount of refuge that you're going to be making as a community. So you have to get those resources. So when you're placing your 3rd, your 4th, even your 5th guy into one of these particular areas, you're loading up. You're going to have to take actions like clean, which is going to reduce things, or trade, which is going to just ditch all those for some kind of trade bonus. I mean, you really, really, really have to manage resources in this game.
Aside from the 2 that Ryan mentioned, the furnish and trade, which are attached to those 2 tracks, which have a lot to do with scoring and cleaning and getting things out. The other ones are gathering for the most part, and then you have that special one. The other 2 is cook and craft. Cooking is pretty straightforward. You're going to have to feed your people. This is one of those games at the end of each of the rounds, you're going to have food for all your people, unless you have some roofs. The food, the way it works is it has this value of 1 to 4 that you have when you use that action. There are other things you can get in the game that enhance that, so your cooking value is much higher.
Like
so you
the
can,
utensils we mentioned earlier.
so you can get a lot more done and a lot more cooked. And when you cook, it basically gives you food, but also gives you some other resources, sort of leftover resources that can be used for all sorts of other things. The crafting is very straightforward. When you go here, you're going to spend the values at the bottom of any one of the tiles and flip it over to its enhanced side, which is a much better side. The sort of the efficiency of the action is better, but they're also worth points.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways to get points, but I think the player that's going to do the best is the player that most efficiently uses all of their resources. And I think it's hard to describe or hard to show you just as we're kind of talking about this game. As you kind of play it though, I think the clicks, just how brilliant it is, the way that it encourages you to use, like when you cook and you make the animal, you don't just get food. You also, what are you going to do with the bones?
Yeah, you have bones.
Are you just going to throw them away, or are you going to use them to upgrade your things? Like when you're looking back culturally at some of these different civilizations and thinking, okay, well, this represents how they used every part of that animal. That to me is very interesting. And if you can do that, if you can keep using every single part and you don't let your resources get bloated, you'll be generating so few trash, because at the end of the game, like David said, yeah, there are points to be scored, but there's also negative points to avoid.
Yeah.
And if you're in the game with a bunch of trash, every piece of trash or midden that you have is negative points. Plus, if you see on these sliders, the higher up you go, if this slider is all the way at the end, that's negative 6 points at the end of the game. And this is not a game where we're talking hundreds of points.
No.
6 points can be quite significant.
This is a tight point game. Some of the cards are going to have a few points here and there, but a lot of those points are going to come from going up probably either one of those 2 tracks pretty significantly. It'd probably be pretty challenging. I'm sure it's possible to go up both the tracks pretty solidly, but it takes a significant amount of efficiency. And speaking of efficiency, I want to point out, I don't think this is a game of like trying to, at every moment, have no trash.
Sure.
Because, like we said, the way it ramps, you kind of want some, not bloat, but you want some in that last
you
round
have to spend it.
actually do some things. Because then you'll find yourself, well, I guess I'll put him here, but I can't do anything with it. So you kind of want to really balance that, and it takes at least one full game to kind of gather the experience of like, okay, I think what the efficiency is.
Right, because you can clean up your board, and the clean action doesn't just remove the trash, it does let you actually slide this back down to reduce those victory points. Of course, if you clean too much early, you might just end up pushing it back, and maybe you've wasted some actions there. So again, I mean, this is an efficiency puzzle mixed in with that resource management, but I don't think I've ever seen a game that gives you this many different resources to manage.
I certainly haven't. If you have,
Maybe
please,
Feast for Odin. There's a lot in Feast for Odin.
There are, but this is still certainly not little wooden bits.
Right.
But if you've seen a game or you know of a game where you think, oh, I've got one that has more than 16 resources or 16 plus resources, let us know in the comments below. Also, if you have any more questions about the game at all, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.